One of the most debated topics of the last few hundred years, really the last 100 years, has been whether or not there is extraterrestrial life. Now, a lot of us think it's silly, that there's no way this could possibly exist, and that if something like that did exist, it would have surfaced itself already. And I think the same as well. I think that there's a high chance that there's probably nothing out there in space, that there is any form of life, maybe except the form of cells. I think that could be there. But everyone has basically concluded that no, we have not found any extraterrestrial life. But a story back in the 70s, late 70s, basically threw everyone off. They had no idea what to do, and even today we still have no idea whether or not it is credible. But unlike most other alien stories where they claim these aliens came and abducted them or did scientific experiments on them, where they seemed so unrealistic and only had one person to claim it, the story of Travis Walton was much different because he had witnesses, many witnesses, and they all underwent many polygraphs, which are lie detector tests, and the results are just amazing. So let's get into it. So in the summer of the late 1970s, Travis Walton and a few buddies were employed as lumberjacks. So basically they would go be hired by companies to clear out patches of the forest for buildings. And, Travis Walton and his friends were very level-headed people. There was nothing extraordinary about them, just 6 dudes looking to make a living. It wasn't all that extraordinary. And Travis Walton has actually gone on air saying this story before, on the Joe Rogan Experience, as well as in many other interviews, and it was well documented. But he claims, as well as other friends claim, that he was extremely brave and didn't really care for his life. He was sort of like the typical bad boy with a Harley, and he was just this rough, rugged man just looking to make a living. And there's actually a story where he went and saw a black bear or some form of a bear, and actually got outside of his car and started chasing the bear, which is incredible because everyone else would have run. And so the story starts that they had this job they had to do where they had to clear out this ginormous patch of forest, and him and his team went up and they started cutting the trees down, and it was just this immensely large project that would take months. And they had very little breaks in between, just a few minutes to eat, and they'd keep cutting down trees, as well as loading them up on their cars to take them down. And even with their immensely difficult work, very little breaks, they were still way behind schedule. And so on one of these nights, they finished working. They're all tired, exhausted, but otherwise glad that the workday is over. And so Travis Walton then decides, and his team, to go down the mountain to go back to their families. They've ended the workday, they're on good vibes, and they're done. So him and his friends all go in the pickup truck that they have, and they start heading down the mountain, and they see this bright light in the distance. And they don't think much of it yet. They know there are other teams looking and cutting trees down, so they think, oh, maybe it could be one of them. But as they're driving, this light just seemed so strange, like it couldn't have been from a man's light or something. It had to be humongous. So naturally, since this is their workspace, they got worried and thought that it could have been a wildfire sprouting and could have been something really dangerous. So Travis decides, why don't we go check it out? And his friends were a bit reluctant, but at the end of the day, they went, and they're like, whatever. And so they went, they're driving along this path, and they get closer and closer to the light. And in this line of trees, there's like this little clearing where the light originated from, where it had no trees. It was just sort of standing there. And when they got there, they couldn't believe what they saw. What they claimed to have seen was this big disc-looking thing that was just hovering. It didn't make any noise. It was just hovering with few lights on, doing nothing. And when you look at some of the interviews, like on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, he says that it was some of the most incredible craftsmanship he has ever seen. And, he said it was just fluid. It wouldn't move. It didn't float. There was no obvious propulsion system. It was just there. And, all of a sudden he decided to unbuckle his seatbelt and he got out of the car. And his friends were obviously pleading with him, like, oh, don't go out there. We don't know what this is. And he kept walking, sort of disregarded their pleas. And so they didn't say anything. And, he's like crawling up there, not crawling, but like walking up there very slowly, just admiring, looking up. And he's just like amazed by what he sees. And he knows he's getting a little bit too close, but his curiosity just gets the best of him. And then once he gets to a certain point where he's really only like 10 feet away from this floating object, he starts to notice that the disc starts to move around very slowly, and there's almost like this mechanical whirring noise from what I've heard him describe it as. And his friends immediately freaked out. So they start yelling at him, like, come back, we gotta go. And he wouldn't listen. He just was planning on going back, he said in an interview, but he just had to look. It was just so amazing. So he took a couple steps like closer to this floating disc, and all of a sudden, this large beam of light, he said it looked like a lightning bolt. His friend said it looked like a lightning bolt. This immensely powerful light came out, and he instantly started running, and he went behind this log. But this light zapped him and sent him flying 20 feet. And his friends immediately freaked out. They hobbled in and they started driving away as fast as they can. They're trying to convince themselves that he's dead. They're straight out crying, some of them. And you have to acknowledge that these are like rough men. And they're sitting here crying, scared, don't know what they do. So as the friends have fully ditched Travis at this point, they're going down the mountain. And once they've calmed down, their nerves are a bit better. Not good by any means, but a bit better. They decide, you know what, we have to go back to save Travis. And all of them were like so scared, but they knew they had to do it. So they go back up this mountain, back to the same exact spot where this happened. But Travis wasn't there, and the floating thing wasn't there. Everything was just as if it was normal. And they start looking. They looked for hours, and they couldn't find any sign of Travis, any sign that he had been zapped or that he had died. He was just gone. And, they were freaking out at that point. So then they decide to go down to the mountain because they're like, we need to call the police. Get them involved. Have them search. And basically, they go down to the mountain, this time for real. They actually get to the bottom of the mountain, and they find a payphone. And once they're at the payphone, they dial 911. And they don't know what to make out of this. They're not going to say some alien spaceship came, zapped my friend, and now he's gone. Because no one's going to believe that. So one of the friends got on the phone, and he basically told the police that he needed his help, but that he would only tell him why he needed his help once he came. And so the cop agreed. He came with, his backup cop. And so they tell him the story that this thing came, this ship, it looked like, it zapped our friend, and we don't know where it is. And the two cops just didn't believe him at all. They did not know what was going on. And so they sent a search party up into the mountain and they searched. And as the days went on, the police just disregarded the story, essentially. And they basically said that this was a murder, that these guys were just trying to cover it up with some silly alien story. Because, I mean, think about it. If you're a grown man, or even a grown woman, and you hear this crazy alien abduction story that defies everything you've learned, you're going to immediately disregard it. You're going to be like, there's no possible way this is what actually happened. And as time goes on, Travis's family, more specifically his brother, is coming, and he's literally searching wildly for his brother. And the cops and this whole search team is everywhere, and the cop is like getting annoyed. It's been like a couple days now. They can't find him, and now the cop is starting to make deals with him, with all these friends separately. There were 5 friends. And he'd go up to each one and be like, if you tell me where the body is, I'll give you an easier sentence. And, you know, they immediately knew that things were going to turn out really badly for them if they didn't find Travis. So now they're all frightened. And now they're searching frantically as well. And as the days go on, right, they even, like, this cop just gets so frustrated that he gets one of the world's best polygraph experts with like a 97% approval rate, which basically means that he'll catch you if you're lying. Like, there's no way to bypass it. And so he interviews them all separately, and 4 of them passed the test, and 1 of them was inconclusive. Now, that doesn't mean that that friend was not telling the truth. It just means that the results came back quite wobbly or bad, so they didn't know how to read it correctly, so they just said inconclusive. And so now this cop just doesn't know what to do. You know, he thought, aha, I had you. You can't do anything now. We're going to catch the bad guys. But now he's in this state of pretty much utter shock. Like, are these guys really telling the truth? And at this point, this story is making like national coverage. It's in newspapers. It's everywhere. And it just starts to go ballistic. Like, people are accusing them. The town's accusing them. You murdered this person. And they're really starting to be ostracized as the search goes on. And on one of the days, these people in red suits, one of the men would say, were what looked like they were scanning for metals in the ground. And so one of the friends went up to them and was like, hey, what are you guys doing? And they said that they were looking for anything unusual. And so the guy was like, well, I was there the day it was zapped. Why don't you scan me? And so they scan him with like this metal detector looking thing, and nothing shows up. And then he remembers that he left his hard hat, you know, because he's a worker, in his truck. So he goes, he gets the hard hat, and he brings it back. And then they scan it, and their thing starts like beeping like uncontrollably, like they have found whatever they needed to find. And so he sort of asked them like, oh, what does this mean? And they wouldn't really give him an answer. They just kept avoiding it, blah, 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 blah. Like, they just gave lame excuses. They wouldn't explain it at all. And so he eventually went back to the cop leading this, and he said, who are those guys in the red suits over there? What were they scanning? And the cop was like, what red guys? I didn't admit anyone to come here except anyone in a police jacket. And so now they're bewildered. They don't know what just happened. And so the cop goes chasing after them, but they're not there anymore. They just rode off or disappeared. No one ever knows what happened to that guy. And they did verify him on the polygraph. He was not lying about this experience. And then out of the blue, Travis Walton claims to have just appeared on this like abandoned road, really in the middle of nowhere, in pain, in agony, and he was just tired and famished. Like, he was not in a good state. And so he just gets up and starts like walking or sort of jogging, and he jogs along this road for quite a while, and he eventually ends up at a payphone. And the first person he calls is his brother. And his brother's just so darn relieved that he's there. He asks what happened, and Travis is like, I don't know where I am, I don't know what's happening. And so it takes them a while to find him, but Travis's brother does find him, but he doesn't tell anyone. He just brings him straight back to the house so he can rest. He feels that he doesn't need any, excess press, and he should be well cared for before anyone sees him. So they do that. The cop finds out, and he eventually asks for a meeting with him. And over these past few days, Travis's memory starts to come back. And they think that the reason why he couldn't immediately remember what had happened was because he was just in such a state of shock that everything just wiped out temporarily. He was just primarily in survival mode. Like, I need to survive at any cost. And as the memories come back, he starts to feel more and more remorseful. And this was his story. So, on that night that he was zapped, he woke up in what looked like a hospital room. He felt mortally wounded, and he couldn't understand why. And he was attached, he said, to like these things, and there were like a hole in his arm that had been incisioned and then stitched back. And he thought, oh, my friends brought me to a hospital. And then he claims that these things walked in, like humanoid figures with big white heads and small bodies with, they didn't have any emotions on their face, just expressionless and very short. And so he didn't know what these were. He freaked out. And so he ripped all this stuff off of him, and he pushed one. And in his interview, he says he was so weak that he really couldn't have survived to fight against men. But he said when he pushed this person, he just fell back like a doll almost, It was just so darn easy to push him back. And he just started running. And as he's running through this place, he doesn't know where he's at. He opens one of these doors and just finds tons of these weird aircraft-looking figures. And he sees them all parked. It was almost like an aircraft carrier with a bunch of different parked ships, or maybe it was a garage. He wasn't too sure. And then he runs into someone that looks like a human, but it's wearing like a space mask looking thing. He's also expressionless, but he does look more human. And so he's going up to this person. He's like, please help me, please help me. And the guy doesn't say a word. He just takes him by the arm and drags him back to this table. And then he's wiped out. And his fear was just so intense. And over, I guess, the day or something, I'm not too sure of the story. I can't remember the exact details. But they eventually were done with him, whatever they were doing. And so they just dropped him off in the middle of the road. And they polygraphed him. They interviewed him. It was nationwide. They found Travis Walton. And his polygraph went through. He was telling the truth. Everyone was telling the truth. And until today, we don't know what happened. And when you look at those polygraph percentages, it is nearly impossible for everyone to maintain the same story, maintain the same levels of stress, because when you're lying, your stress levels go up and your heart rate goes up. So that's an indicator of how they can tell. And the fact that even 40 years later, today, these men are still saying the same stories, unchanged. You know, it's similar to the Bob Lazar story. His story has not changed. And although these men, you know, the experience separated them, they're not friends anymore, they all believe very firmly in what they're saying. And you have to think about the magnitude of that, right? Because when you're an esteemed person, or not even an esteemed person, and you're claiming an alien came and did experiments on you, or did whatever he did on you, people are going to think you're just like this Looney Tune, right? Then they think, oh, this guy's mentally insane. They start to be prejudiced, and a lot of these men's lives were ruined because of that. You know, they couldn't get jobs, a lot of them. It was just a very, very difficult time, and still is, because when they say their story, they're still not believed. And Travis Walton says that this is not something he makes up. You know, he doesn't like the consequences that came, but he believes people should know. And he also believes that there is extraterrestrial life. And he says that he claims they're not harmful, because he believes that if they were harmful, they would have killed him. He wouldn't have been brought back. Even with this massive search, he still thinks that they would have killed him if they were truly harmful. Another interesting thing that he says is that he theorizes that these people, or humanoid figures, aliens, whatever you want to call them, he thinks that, like the humans, we're on the same path to where they are. Meaning, he believes they were developed and evolved millennia ago, and since then the technology has just gone so high that now they could travel the galaxy. Now they don't even need to talk because they mentally talk to each other. And it's just this crazy, bizarre theory that he truly believes. And when you think about it, there is some sense in it, right? Just 100 years ago, cars were going like 30 miles per hour. Now they're going nearing 300 miles per hour. We couldn't get to anywhere in the world without it taking days. Now we can get there in a matter of hours. And now we can just call someone on the complete opposite side of the world. And when you think about it like that, if we have 1,000, 2,000, even 3,000 years, our technology is going to be so immense, so developed, so advanced, that there may be no need to communicate. There may be no need for basic things. And we may essentially become this like immaculate form of humans in their strongest form, technologically and mentally. Until today, he still shares the same story. But yeah, that's what's going to do it for today, guys. Tell me what you think about the Travis Walton story. Do you think aliens exist? I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the subscribe button. It's free. And like the video. Thank you.